Hello, welcome back to the Fretboard. My name is Mark French and I do guitars. This time I thought we could talk about guitar strings. Now, I've got two nice guitars here. Here's a solid body electric made by my friend Doug Hunt. Did a real nice job on this. This one, like most guitars, has 6 strings on it. And if you look on them, you can see that these are all kind of the same in color. They have kind of a steel metallic color. 3 of them are just plain wire. But 3 other ones, the lower pitched ones, have another wire wrapped around them, even though it's roughly the same color. If you look at this acoustic I've got here, this is a Fender folk guitar. It is a CF140S, if you're into that sort of thing. And you can see the strings look a little different. There's 2 plain ones and there's 4 of them that have some other wire wrapped around them. These plain ones look like they're steel, and these windings don't look like they're steel. They look like they're something else. Well, these are either brass or bronze, depending on the type of string it is. I think these might be brass. Okay, that gets us to the first thing. There are 2 kinds of guitar strings, basically. There are steel strings and there are nylon strings. Now, nylon strings are usually used on classical guitars. Very occasionally they might be used on something else. But electric and steel string or folk guitars use steel strings. Big surprise. Well, what kind of steel? Well, this stuff right here is called music wire, and if you're into material properties and things, go on Matt Webb or someplace and look up A228. It's called music wire, and it's an exceptionally strong type of steel. It's 3, 4, 5 times as strong as the steel you normally see in your life, that's made out of furniture, the fittings on my desk, this little piece of metal down here. This stuff is probably 5 times stronger than that stuff is. Okay? And the interesting part is, music wire doesn't have a bunch of real exotic components to it. It doesn't have unobtainium or anything in it. If you look at the formula, the recipe, it looks like pretty much just generic steel. But the way it's processed when this wire is drawn out makes it very, very strong. So it's strong and light for what we need here. It's a good material to use for guitar strings. These other ones here have a winding around them, and the winding is there to add weight only. Now, if you want a string to vibrate at a low frequency like this, as opposed to this, okay, you want it to be heavier, but you don't want it to be stiffer. Well, how do you do that? Well, you take a steel core and you wrap another wire around it. That wrapping or winding adds mass, but it doesn't add stiffness, so that's why we use it. Now, acoustic guitar strings, like I said, use either a brass or bronze winding, usually brass. Electric strings need to react with the magnetic field that's created by the pickup. There's magnets inside there. And for these strings to interact with those, these have to be steel. So these strings aren't wound with brass or bronze. They are wound with nickel-coated steel. So these strings that go on the electric guitar are a little bit different than the ones on the acoustic guitar because they have to have some magnetic properties that those strings don't have. All right? So what do strings look like? Where do you get them? Stuff like that. Well, I went down in the lab and I brought up a big bundle of strings here. Well, if you've never bought strings before, or if you're a little new to it, strings usually come in a package like this. Now, this is a company called D'Addario. They make very good strings. There are many companies out there that make good strings. I use these a lot. I've had real good luck with them. And these are acoustic strings. They come in, almost all strings, come in these little paper folders. And if you open the folder up, you get, here, let's open this one up. What's this one? Okay, these are phosphor bronze acoustic guitar strings. Okay, so you open this up and you get this little plastic package in there. Well, when the strings are in the store, you don't want them to corrode, you don't want them to be exposed to water or air or anything like that. So they come in these little plastic packages, which is nice. And on the back, it'll give you information about the strings. It'll tell you diameters and tensions and that sort of thing. Okay? So these are acoustic strings. Those are acoustic strings. I've got some electric strings in here. I've got some nylon strings. Let's see what those look like. We'll zoom in here in a minute. I've already opened these up. But if you open these up, there's a couple of solid plastic strings and there's a couple of wound ones as well. Those are for acoustic guitars. And even if you buy strings for other instruments, they still come like that. These are dulcimer strings that I have in my little supply here. Sometimes you buy strings, you buy partial sets. Once in a while you only break one string. You can buy individual strings. Okay, this is another D'Addario string, and this says BW024, bronze wound 024. That number there, 024, that's its diameter in thousandths of an inch. So this one's 24 thousandths of an inch in diameter. All right. The other thing you'll see on these string packages, if you look right there, okay, see right up there, it says this is EJ17, which is just the part number, but it says medium 013 to 056. What does that mean? Well, they're medium. It means they're not the lightest strings you could put on an acoustic guitar, but they're not the heaviest one either. They're medium. The largest string in there is 056, so 56 thousandths of an inch in diameter, and the smallest one is 13 thousandths of an inch in diameter. Well, if you're looking for string sizes, if you need some context here, the thinnest strings you routinely see are 9 thousandths of an inch in diameter. In fact, this one right here on this guitar, that one's 9 thousandths of an inch in diameter. I tend to like light strings. The heaviest high E string you normally see on electrics is about 11 or 12. 13 is awfully heavy for electrics. For acoustics, they go for a little bit higher, a little bit larger strings. So here, a 13 is a medium string. So when you go into the music store and they ask you what you want, you can go in there and say, I need a set of electric 10s. Okay? That means you need electric strings, and you want the smallest string to be 10 thousandths of an inch in diameter. The other strings in the pack will then be chosen sort of proportionally to go along with that one. Now, this being America, there's all these different kinds of strings you can get, and every manufacturer has these special combinations of strings. So if you like particularly heavy low-end strings or particularly light low-end strings or whatever, there is probably a manufacturer that's going to make something you'll like. Other things to think about when you're buying strings. If you're like me and you are harmonically challenged, that sound you make when you that noise you make as you're moving your fingers up and down the neck, I've noticed like Leo Kottke doesn't do that, Mark Knopfler doesn't do that, James Taylor doesn't do that. Well, I do. And what's going on here is I'm not lifting up my fingers and moving them back down again. I'm letting them slide down the string. Well, you're not really supposed to do that, and I'm not a good enough player for it to really matter, but I can cheat. I can buy those. Okay? These are called D'Addario flat tops. What they've done is they've processed the strings during production to remove some of the outer winding to smooth it down a little bit, so when a piker like me starts dragging his fingers up and down the string, it doesn't make that awful noise. There are all different kinds of windings. There's even flat windings. You can buy flat wound strings. So, talked about this enough. Let's zoom in on my little desk here. Let's see what these things look like up close. Okay, let's open up that pile of strings I had on my desk here, and let's see what these things look like up close. I'll start with this one right here. This is a D'Addario acoustic or electric plain steel. It's acoustic or electric because this one's just steel. It doesn't have any winding on it, so it doesn't matter whether you put this on an acoustic guitar or an electric guitar. It's 10 thousandths of an inch. Okay, that's what that 010 means. And if you're keeping track, there's 25.4 millimeters in an inch. So this is 0.254 millimeter in diameter, and that's what it says up there. That's a quarter of a millimeter. So this is what it looks like on the back, and they'll have tension and pitch, okay, on here, assuming a Fender-sized guitar. So you open this up. These come in a little roll like this. Okay, and they're always wound this particular way. Now this is a wire string, and you don't want to put a kink in it. If you put a kink in it, that's a weak spot, and it's probably going to break there. So you need to be a little careful with these things. Let's see what's in here. This one end has this little gizmo. I'll put my hand there. Okay, that's a little brass. It's called a ball, but it looks like a little section of a tube, and it goes at the bridge of the guitar, and that's what keeps the string from pulling out. Okay, that anchors the string at one end. So to open this up, they're just sort of wound a little bit at the end to keep them in that little loop. and you can unwind them eventually. You'd think I'd be better at this by now. There we go. And you've got this nice bendy little string. Right? This end, by the way, guys, that end right there, let's see if I can find something to put that on. That end right there, that sucker is wicked sharp. Okay, there you can kind of see it. That's about the size of a hypodermic needle, by the way. And when you clip it with a pair of pliers, or if you're like me and you use this to do some of your guitar work, that end there gets really sharp, and if you're not careful, you poke your finger into it. Well, this will go right in, and it hurts like crazy. The problem is it doesn't make any blood because it's such a little hole. So you're sitting there yelling because your finger hurts, but there's no blood, so all your friends think you're not very tough. So anyway, there's what the string looks like when you get it out of the package, and this is a very typical 10 size string, and these come in. Like I said, the smallest one I've ever routinely seen is a 9. There are 8s. I've actually read about 7.5s, which have got to be about like a human hair. Different players prefer different sizes of string. They behave a little differently and they sound a little different. So different playing styles call for different kinds of strings, and it's very reasonable for a good player or even an average player like me to have a size of typical kind of string they prefer. So there's the 10. Here's the other end of the scale. This is an 056. Okay, so this one has a steel core. This one looks like the steel core may be coated. It's very typical for this core here to be hexagonal. It's not round. On that other string was round. Let me find something else here. This works pretty well. Okay, that core right there is hexagonal on a lot of strings. If you get a video microscope or something and look close, that really is hexagonal, and it's wound with this bright brass wire. Okay, and what this does, like I said, is it keeps the string from becoming too rigid, too hard to play. Also, the more flexible the string is, the closer the harmonics will be to the correct pitch. When strings make pitches that are too high in their harmonics, it's called inharmonicity. That's a thing that people talk about. It's in my books, it's in lots of other books. Here's that, we can see that winding here. It's got the same ball end on the other end. Okay, this is pretty typical. There are very, very few steel strings that don't have that little thing on the end, and almost all bridges are designed to accommodate those. Now for the video here, I've been trying to pull this wire off, trying to unwind it, and it really doesn't want to come off, which is actually good. It means this stuff is really on there. Okay, you don't want the wire slipping, and I don't think this does. The nice part about this is even though the string is very heavy, it's very flexible. Again, we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to put it back, we're going to wind it up. Now, normally once you've handled strings too much, you want to either put them on or pitch them. The oil in your hands tends to corrode strings after a while, and they start to sound bad after a while because of corrosion and all the crud that you get on them, finger oil, dirt, grease, whatever it is. And there are coated strings now. D'Addario makes coated strings, and other companies do as well. There's a company called Elixir that specializes in coated strings, and those are supposed to last a little longer. They don't degrade as much because they've got a coating on them that keeps the dirt and the grease and stuff out from in between those windings. Okay, we've talked about steel strings. Now let's talk about nylon strings. Now, nylon strings are generally used on classical guitars. It says right there, classical guitar. These are D'Addario Pro Art strings. I've had real good luck with these and I like them. As I said, there are many string companies out there, and there's some very good ones. D'Addario was simply one of the very good ones. For logistical reasons, I try to standardize materials I use in my lab, and I've pretty much standardized on D'Addario strings. The prices are good, the quality seems very good, there's no reason to change right now. If you prefer something else, good for you, that's fine. Now, nylon strings come in solid strings and wound strings. Now I'm missing one of the solid ones out of this pack because we used it for a test a while back. And these are wound strings. These have a nylon core and then a thin wire winding on the outside. So let's start with the nylon one first. This is a B string. Now if you can see here, there's no ball end on this one. Maybe we'll put this Maybe that makes it a little easier to see. There's no ball end on these. These are just pieces of nylon string. It looks like really, really high quality weed eater string. That's almost what it is. Emphasis on the high quality part. And the reason is that classical guitars have a bridge that doesn't require that ball end. They're actually tied on in a way that the knot locks the string on so it won't slide. So that these come in different sizes, and these are just clear nylon. The wound strings are made a little differently. They have a nylon core in them, but it's not a solid core. It's a stranded core. So if you take one of these things apart, and all I'm going to do is pull the outer winding off. There we go, with my pliers here. So you can see there's the wire that was originally wrapped around it, and this stuff right here is fluffy. Okay, it's not solid string. It's stranded, and it's a very, very fine strand. It looks like something you might make dental floss or something out of. Right, that's what the core of these things are like. And because of that, the solid core and the wound stranded core behave a little differently. Nylon is different than metal. This is a viscoelastic material, so when you put this on your guitar, these stretch for a while. So when you put a new set of nylon strings on, the solid strings will stretch out. You'll tune it, it'll go flat. You tune it, it'll go flat. And you do this for a little bit. You know, somewhere between an hour and a day usually is what it takes. And the reason is that this stuff is actually stretching out at room temperature. It's deforming permanently. Steel doesn't do that, so there's no such thing as room temperature creep in steel, but this stuff does creep. Creep is a permanent deflection under load. That's the engineers call it creep. So the solid strings creep. These strings do not so much. They do a little, but not much. When you put these on, you tune them once or twice, and they tend to stay. Part of the reason is these strands are just super fine, and another is that this is stretched out during the manufacturing process, so it's actually stretched during manufacturing so it won't creep once you're using it. The other thing that's nice about this, or interesting about this stuff really does, these solid nylon strings really do have a little bit of bending stiffness. Okay? When I flex this, you know, it tends to want to flex back. These don't. This stuff, the mathematics assume that guitar strings have no bending stiffness, and this stuff really almost doesn't. The bending stiffness of these strings is extremely low. I can wind it into a little coil like that, and it's no problem. I couldn't begin to do that with that big, heavy wound steel string. So these feel a little different. The tension required to bring a set of nylon strings up to pitch is lower than on a steel string guitar. So if you want, you can put nylon strings on a steel string guitar. It's even possible to buy nylon strings that have ball ends on them. And if you don't want to do that, you can buy just some beads from the craft store and put a little knot in there, tie a bead to the end. But what you cannot do is put a set of steel strings on a guitar, classical guitar designed for nylon strings, because if you do, you are going to apply so much tension you may damage the guitar. It's not designed for the loads you're trying to put on it. Now the last thing I want to go over here is carbon strings. In the classical world, there are companies that sell what they call carbon strings, and this is a company called Hannebach. There's 3 carbon G strings, and they're carbon in the sense, not that they're carbon fiber. That's what it sounds like. They're not actually carbon fiber. They're a different polymer than nylon strings are made out of. Okay, it feels different. It's got a lot lower bending stiffness. Okay, and some players really prefer these carbon strings. Now the carbon part of this is really kind of marketing, I think. They're calling it carbon in the sense that as a polymer it's got carbon atoms in it. Well, I guess that's true. I've got carbon atoms in me, and I bet you do too. So make what you want of that, but it's not uncommon to find higher-end players or more accomplished players using carbon strings. And when you buy carbon strings, sometimes what you get is a set of 3 that are just the solid strings. They assume you're going to use the wound strings you normally get and just replace the solids with these carbon strings. Alright, so that's pretty much it for strings right now. We learned about steel strings and nylon strings, and we now know the difference between acoustic guitar strings and electric guitar strings. I hope this helps, and we'll talk to you next time.